Hi, it's Dwyer. GamblersAdvisory.com, DwyerVIP.com for premium picks. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's do something new here on YouTube. Let's pioneer something that might not have been done before, right? We'll call this the I don't have a clue video. I don't have a clue who wins tonight's Don the Bomb George versus David the Destroyer Lopez fight that's taking place in Chicago. Very strong arguments can be made for both men. But I believe there are times when the odds line up and you don't have to have a clue about who's going to win the fight to structure a hedge that makes you money. Right? The hedge I'm recommending in this fight is Don George by KO, hedged against the over. Let's talk about it. Don George is a three-time Chicago Golden Gloves champion. He has a huge punch. His knockout ratio is 75%, and he usually fights at 168 pounds, right? Boxing has weight classes for a reason. Understand, this fight is taking place at 160 pounds. Donald George is going to be carrying a huge punch with him to 160. He's 28 years old. If he were 33 years old, I would say the weight loss would be a big problem. But since Don George keeps himself in shape and is still in his 20s, I think he should be able to pull off the weight loss while maintaining his power. FYI, in his last fight, Don George weighed less than 162 pounds and got a first-round knockout. Right? He's a big hitter. More importantly, he's a big hitter from Chicago, fighting in Chicago. And the one thing with Don George is Don George feeds off the crowd. Right? You're going to have a nationally televised event with a guy who's a bit of a ham in the ring, who has big-time power, fighting before his hometown fans. Don George is not showing up to get a decision, right? He wants the KO. Now let's talk about David Lopez. I have a confession to make. David Lopez is one of my favorite fighters. This is a guy who's only lost once since something like 2005. And that was to Austin Trout in a title fight. Right? Lopez is 6'2", very tall for a middleweight. Right? And Lopez is the superior technician in this fight. In my opinion, in terms of skills, he's much more skilled than Don George. Right? However controversial that sounds. Here's the problem with David Lopez, and it's a big problem. Right? David Lopez, who has fought many fights at 154, right? Including fights at 160, has a less than 50% KO ratio. He only knocks out 42% of the people he faces, right? He's the kind of guy who outboxes you. He doesn't knock you out. In fact, he has not had a knockout since 2008. So what we have is a bigger man with a bigger punch fighting before his hometown, and that's Don George. And he's going up against, granted, a taller man, but a smaller man, right, without the knockout punch, who's the superior technician. So here's the way I think you should play the fight. Take the highest over-under you can get on this fight. If it's 9.5 rounds, that's good. Go ahead and take it, right? And hedge that, because you'll get the best odds possible on the highest over-under, right? You want to take the over on the highest over-under, right? Get maximum odds. And you want to hedge that with Don George by KO. Even though Lopez is the superior technician, in my opinion, the only guy who can get a knockout in this fight is Don George. Understand, Don George against heavy puncher at 168. Adonis Stevenson was still hanging around late in that fight, right? I understand Don George had a problem with Francisco Sierra. But again, Sierra is a huge puncher, as fans of George Groves know, right? A huge puncher at 168 pounds. I don't believe Lopez is going to be able to hit George with anything to take George out, right? My point to you is, if you have the over on the highest over-under, and you hedge that with George by knockout, and understand, not even Austin Trout was able to knock out David Lopez, so you should be able to get great odds. Then, if George gets the KO, you collect. If this fight goes to decision, no matter how close it is, you collect, right? But be aware of the risk. You lose it all. If the smaller man, right, smaller but taller, right, tall and lean, if the smaller man, David Lopez, gets his first knockout since 2008, you lose it all. I'm willing to take that risk. I like the over, hedged against Don George by KO. Let me hear from you. Good luck in this fight. As I said before, the risk you take is your own. Let me just say too, I'm serious when I say I don't have a clue who wins this fight. But based on styles, I believe the outcome's either going to be the over or Don George by KO. Hope you leave your post-fight comments for us here in the comment section. Hope you leave your pre-fight comments here in the comment section. Tell me if you agree or disagree with the pick. Let us know how you're playing this one tonight. Thanks for stopping by.